Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this live stream presentation in collaboration with the Los Alamos Mountaineers. This virtual program is being brought to you by the Pajarito Environmental Education Center, or PEAC, which operates the Los Alamos Nature Center. The Nature Center is now open to the public. We have brand new hours starting next week, June 1st. We have, 2nd. We have shortened hours right now. Check our website for our current hours and more presentations like this one. And I do just want to give a quick shout out to our wonderful partners, the Los Alamos Mountaineers, on all of the members and donors and volunteers and staff who have made it possible for us to keep doing these programs over the past year. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Melanie to start the Mountaineers meeting.
Welcome, everyone. We're very honored to have you join us today. I know the weather is beautiful out there right now, and the fact that you're joining us for our Mountaineers meeting is, really appreciated. We are lucky to still be on the Zoom format through PEAC hosting, and so I hope you're taking advantage of that. Able to get some dinner, get comfortable and relax and sit back and enjoy the show. So I just have a couple of things that I wanted to announce before we move on to the main attraction. First of all, if you haven't heard, Chuck Califf passed away on May 16th, 2021. I think many of you will know Chuck. He was a well-known local rock climber. There are some details in his obituary in the Los Alamos Reporter. I'd like to just take a short minute to recognize and remember Chuck by reading part of his obituary. Chuck was always in motion. He excelled at rock climbing, cross-country skiing, backpacking, swimming, and bicycle riding. A good day for him included as many activities as possible, inspired by the beauty of nature. Chuck loved to make beautiful things. He painted watercolor landscapes that expressively captured his view of the world. He built fine wood furniture, baked sourdough bread, and played the piano. Never complacent, he was always curious to learn new things and to improve his skills. He had many friends who joined in his adventures. He was a good storyteller and quick to joke. Chuck is survived by his wife of 49 years, Barbara, son Brandock, Danielle, daughter Rachel, granddaughters Ellen and Francesca, and brothers George and Dan. Not one to wallow in sorrow, Chuck wanted his family and friends to remember him while outside exploring the wide world. Celebration of his life will be announced at a later date, and donations in Chuck's memory may be made to the Southwest Nordic Ski Club at P.O. Box 1556, Los Alamos, New Mexico, 87544. And there is a website address as well on the Los Alamos Reporter obituary page. This evening for our agenda, we will also and next have our trip reports and upcoming trips by Cecile Hemes, our trip coordinator, and also Bill Prodorsky, who is serving in the secretary role this year. And then we will move on to the main attraction. We will have an introduction by Rod McCready, our program coordinator. So enjoy the show, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time as well. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome, good evening, and welcome to the May Los Alamos Mountaineers meeting. I'm going to start by presenting the club-sponsored activities. the last month for in celebration of Earth Awareness Month, the club sponsored a trash pickup, and we have photos from Zach Baker from trash he picked up on West Road, and Rod and Debbie McCready that they picked up on the Camazon Trail. So I want to thank everybody who participated, and I also want to thank everyone who just makes it a habit. I think many of us do that, of carrying a plastic backpack in their, a plastic bag in their backpack and just collecting trash on trails. That's just the right thing to do year round. But a big shout out to those who participated in last month's trash pickup. Bill Podorsky led a hike on the Alamo Sulphur Canyon Loop in the Valles Caldera on May 15th. It's in the western part of the valley, and it's a beautiful hike that goes through some very impressive geological features, such as hot springs and fumaroles and geothermal ponds. The hike is described in a book by Coco Ray called Hiking Trails in the Valles Caldera National Preserve. She actually presented to the club about 6 months ago, and it's a great resource if you're interested in hiking in the Valles Caldera. So actually moving on to individual trips, Anita and Malcolm hiked the Rito de los Indios Trail in the Valles Caldera, and that's one of the hikes that is described in Coco Ray's book. And they saw dendroglyphs, as well as an old sawmill and just the beautiful valles. It's an area of the valles that hasn't burned, so it's very green and pristine. Longtime mountaineer Dave Brown is hiking a local trail. Jean sent us those beautiful pictures that she took at Ghost Ranch, kind of a stormy clouds there, but very beautiful. Paul Bradley submitted Mount Taylor on a very beautiful day, and on what he described as an easy hike to the top. France and Chris hiked to Soda Springs with great views of the Rio Grande, and the Meyerhofer Lucas hiked in Carlsbad Cavern and White Sands, and that was in celebration of their 2+2, so two shots plus 2 weeks, so fully vaccinated, and so that was a nice celebration trip. Lori, Dave, and Maggie hiked up a steep hike to the quad chairlift to enjoy some great views in the Santa Fe Basin area. And I, along with 3 friends and 2 dogs, I hiked the Sierra Negra east of Abiquiu. So it was all off trail, and we started on the south side of the mountain and just followed the ridge to the top, and then hiked down following the north ridge. And the views from the top were very, very spectacular, and included the Pedernal and Copper Canyon, El Rito. It was just a great hike, and all the cacti were blooming. That was last Sunday. Patty, Sylvie, and Jean visited the Great Gallery Petroglyph Panel in Canyonlands National Park, and it's in a pretty remote area of Canyonlands. It's a 30-mile drive on a washboard road, and then a 4-mile hike. The panel is estimated to be 7,000 years old, and it's, as you can see, absolutely spectacular. And Bob Williams sent us this picture of, it was stargazing in the Gila wilderness. So the laser is pointing to the North Star, and he pointed the laser for 20 seconds of a 30-minute exposure. That's also a very, very cool picture. So thank you for everybody who sends me picture. And now I'll pass it on to Bill, who will talk about upcoming trips.
Okay. So, and by the way, just since we've talked about some bias hiking, this book by Coco is great. I bought it originally from Peak. It might be there in the Peak gift store. And at any rate, I recommend you go get your own copy. So trips coming up. I'm leading a lot of them. Would very much like to see some other folks leading trips on the calendar here. It's fun. You get to go where you want to go when you organize a trip of your own. So opportunities coming up. San Antonio Mountain is that big dome on the way to Colorado, close to the Colorado border that you see on the way to Alamosa. It is quite prominent, more than 2,000 feet above the surrounding plain. It is a cross-country hike. We're going to get at it from the west side, just going up the Tuskegee slope, which is pretty lumpy. It's not as easy as it looks. It's a hike for our upcoming Monday holiday. There's still a little bit of room. Join me if you're interested. Drop me a line. The raft trip. This trip is so full. I talked to the outfitter, Jerry Hughes, who's hosting the trip for us. The next opportunities to go on this trip, which he runs, but runs infrequently, are in 2024. So I'm just saying this to make you feel bad if you're not part of the trip. Next slide, please. Okay, so the trip that I'd like to emphasize is a llama trip, like the trips BJ is going to tell us about. We've organized many trips with him. We're organizing one again this autumn in the middle of October, which is kind of the perfect time to go. This is a drop camp where BJ takes us in, drops us in the wilderness, says, "Good luck, guys," and comes back like 6 days later to pick us up. And in those 6 days, we have all sorts of lovely explorations. This country is so interesting and so complex. Based on a single backcountry camp, you can explore in every direction and never be bored. The week goes by very, very quickly, and you're sad when it's over. So there are some slots in this trip. Have a look at the Mountaineers webpage, and we very much invite folks to think about joining us. That is the trip opportunities that I wanted to mention, and I'd like to hand over to Rod McCready to move into our program.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. I talked to BJ, excuse me, before the meeting this evening. I don't know him, never met him, so I'm not going to say too much, but he did tell me that when he was young, his parents and other family members got him into the outdoors, hunting and camping, and that really seems to have stuck with him. He's going to say quite a bit himself about how he got to where he is, doing what he's doing, so I'm not going to add anything to that. And with that, BJ, you want to take it away?
Great. Well, thank you for having me. This is a real honor to be able to speak to you all and share some of my experiences and what I've been doing the last 20 years. I'll start with, llama packing. I think it's a great way and a very unique way to experience the outdoors, particularly the Southwest and the desert country which we live in. Around here, the slick rock and all that, it's not an easy place to get around, and these llamas tend to just do really well out here, and I've been really impressed with the way they can pack gear in for us in places that you would think inhospitable to most pack animals. So there's been, I've been doing this for 20 years now. Since I moved to Boulder, it was actually the first job I got when I moved to Boulder. There's, when you're packing with llamas, it's not quite like a river trip. You can't take, the kitchen sink, but you can take everything you would backpacking plus quite a bit more: chairs, tables, you know, stuff like that that you wouldn't really think about backpacking, but you can get a lot of stuff in. And I started my own company about 10 years ago, and well, 10 years ago, and I've been going ever since. So if we'll go to the next slide. For those who have never met me, this is me just in my environment, just to let you all kind of see. And go ahead and go to the next one. So some of my history. So here's the Great Gallery again, which we just saw in the opening presentation. My grandfather, Cecilio Orozco, was an anthropologist at Fresno State University and really interested in the movement of people through the Americas. And his specialty was the Aztec calendar, which everybody knows is the Aztec calendar. He calls the Book of the Sun, which is basically a storybook that told the movement of the people throughout the history. And this area in Utah is really important in that movement. So when I was 10 years old, I came out with him and my father to look at a particular pictograph. And if you go to the next one, this head of Sinbad pictograph is really interesting. And I think for all you scientists, this is kind of a thing, that this pictograph here, which dates back to about the same time as the Great Gallery, as much as 7,000 years ago, is basically a way to tell time. It's a way to use Venus as a timekeeper. And it's kind of hard to see the detail in this one, but basically Venus returns to the same spot every 8 years, sorry. And by using that to deduct from every 8 years, you can get down to a 20-day calendar, which the Mayan calendar is based on. Now, when I was 10 years old, we came out for the winter solstice to see this pictograph. And it left a huge impression on me, you know, just this landscape, everything, the idea that people were here and could keep track of time way back then just has always been with me. And so when I, got a little older, if you go to the next one, just a quick view of, this is in the Paria when I was in college. We used to come out here quite a bit. And I went to school at CU in Boulder, and we used to come out here a lot into Utah. And so when I graduated from CU, I came through Boulder to kind of see if there was anything for me to do here and to find a life here. I've been living in Alaska and Colorado, and Utah just seemed like that middle ground of, where I grew up in Tucson, and my whole family, back to 5 generations in Southern Arizona, kind of seemed the middle ground of between the Sonoran Desert and every place else I had been. So it felt really comfortable here. And we'll go ahead and go on now to I started my own business in 2010, Llama2Boot. And it was interesting. I started with only 5 llamas, and luckily with groups like Bill and Los Alamos Mountaineers and some other groups that have been coming and doing these llama trips, before, when I was working with the former company, I was able to start my own after that one kind of went down. And the return customers are still really how it's still 80% of my business is return customers like Los Alamos every year. And we can go ahead and start just on the 30-second program. Yeah. However, and so now going from, these 5 llamas, this was taken early on, right when I kind of got going, and was still only doing, a few trips a year with just the return clients and all that. Now it's kind of built up to where I can keep busy through most of my season, which is still a really short season. I usually start first week in April, go through the end of May, and that's my spring season. And then in the fall, start mid-September and go through October, and that's it. So there's really less than 4 months that I'm out, but during those 4 months, it tends to be pretty compact and going all the time. And so the logistics and all that are, as you can imagine, when you're leading trips through different places, different groups, different dietary needs, all of it. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, and definitely a lot that happens on the weekends between trips that has, that's kind of the big thing. There's now I'll go ahead and start. I started with 5 llamas, and now we have 18 on the property. Even though we still really only have 9 workers, there's a lot of upcoming workers, and I'm retiring. Seems to retire some every year, some that are ready, some that just are done, and some that really unfortunate to see go. Retired 1 this year and 1 semi-retired, and one of the ones I semi-retired has been the backbone of my company. So it's it's kind of hard to see them go. They're we work all year long together and all that. But so I'll just say, the llama packing for me now, I have my standard kind of 5-day full service trips is kind of the backbone of my company, where I provide the gear, the food, the guiding, which usually is 8 people with three guides. The group size limit is 12 in this area, so we can never go more than 12. But I find, that 10 to 11 is kind of the sweet spot for the number of llamas needed and just cooking and all that kind of stuff. 12, it's 1 more person, but it just seems to be, that 1 extra bit. So that sweet spot's kind of between 10 and 11 is what I've found. But also, as Bill mentioned, the drop camps, and that's what I've always mostly done with Los Alamos is drop camps, where I take in all the gear, drop you guys for the distinguished, for predetermined amount of time, and come back and get you, hopefully all of you. And that's, another big service I provide. And it was kind of originally what I had mostly intended to do, but it seems like the 5-day trips have also been really what a lot of folks want. Now, we did start doing a little bit longer trips, and this year Bill and the group came out and we did a 12-day trip, which was amazing. I think was just something that had to happen in my all these 20 years of packing with llamas. I had never done an extended trip like that. And it had its challenges, of course, but I think everything, it was a really hard year, particularly with water, but the things we got to see were just, fascinating. And just being out for that long, I think puts a whole new perspective on llama packing and the advantages of llama packing. So that's something I'm kind of trying to going to continue, is offer, this kind of all 3 of those, the standard 5-day full service trip, the drop camps, and I'm going to try to squeak in at least 1 extended trip every year, whether it be spring or fall. And I think I really do think there's a bit to appreciate with those longer trips. They take a little more dedication and all that, and I think it can be really fun. So I just want to talk a little bit about how kind of things usually work on these standard 5-day trips, which is the first day is all about getting all the gear together, packing up the llamas, getting out to the trailhead, packing up, which seems to take half the day, and then we hike in. I usually try to keep the first, the camps are usually within 7 miles, and that will put us at our campsite by, close to dinner time, which means that there's kind of usually a quick rush to get campsites going, find campsites, get kitchen all set up, get dinner. And then after that, we have 3 days of day hiking from that base camp. And like, as Bill said, in the drop camps, he tends to do the 6-day trip. So that gives a longer span of day hiking in between. But during those 3 days, it's pretty amazing what you can do when you're already 6-7 miles in. And then you can just explore from there and have the whole day to do between 6-10 miles, whatever groups are able to do. There's quite a diversity of that, and I try to kind of organize that in the beginning of what the groups are expecting, because some groups, they only really plan on hiking 3 to 4 miles a day, and some really want to do 9 to 10 and really get out there. So the diversity is also another one of those things that's both really good and also can be very challenging, of course, because you never know until you kind of, talk to the groups, and actually when you get out there, see what they're really capable of. And so there's a lot to see. I have about 15 different trips I do from different trailheads that go to different areas for different lengths of time. And although I have about 15 different ones, there's probably 5 or 6 that are kind of the main trips I do, which has changed over the course of the years. There's some places I used to go a lot, and now they're just, either overcrowded or things have changed and just not as desirable, or just, I still try to emphasize getting in the backcountry where you just don't see many people, which is getting harder and harder to do, of course. And the photo there with the two dogs, I used to take Frodo Baggins, the back one there, on a lot of my trips, and he's now 13 and doesn't really get out much anymore. But there's which I'll go ahead and bring up a quote which I'll never forget from Bill, who had said there's no situation in the backcountry that can't be made worse by having a dog. And I do appreciate that, because there's a lot of times where I've been in situations where it's like, oh man, what am I going to do with this dog? And for instance, there was one, we encountered a flood situation where I actually had to put Frodo in my backpack and hike him through the river, which was waist deep, knowing full on that if I went in, it might be to his peril. And then had to climb up a pretty big cliff there with him in my backpack to get out of the river canyon. And you just never know how that can go. Luckily, that one worked out just fine. And there's actually a YouTube video that it was taken, which probably can look up. But llamas in general are pretty agile in this country. You see, it's a lot of rock, a lot of sand, and they just tend to do really good on climbing and going down. They have hooves. They don't have hooves like horses. They have 2 claws and a pad, more like a dog, with nails and a pad, and so they can grip without sliding like a horse would without any kind of protective shoes or anything like that. And so they get around good. They can carry about, they can carry, a lot of people say, oh, llamas can carry this or they can carry that. Around here, I try not to weigh them more than 65, 70 pounds at the most, just because the trails we do are pretty strenuous and a lot of diverse terrain, a lot of stepping up, stepping down. There's really no really nice graded trails that we go on, or at least very few of them. And so it's, they're really good animals. And so once we get to our pack, once we get to our camp, we get to day hike without the llamas, which allows us a lot of freedom to run around, get up high, go, take trails that the llamas necessarily either wouldn't be able to go in, or just, it's nice to be able to cover ground without them. And so we do that, and the groups get to see some amazing places. Some will recognize some of these photos of And again, unfortunately, these are some of the places that if you got to see these back 5-10 years ago, good on you, because it's rare to get a photo like that anymore without a bunch of people in there. And so that's one of the hard things I've been dealing with lately, is how to adjust to some of these changes that have been going on around here with, more folks and more outfitters and more just, it's really hard to show up at a camp anymore and expect it to be really pristine, which is really unfortunate. Whether it's because there's already a group there, or there was a group that was not very respectful of how they left it, that kind of thing. It's just things are changing. But as you can see from some of these photos, there's still a lot of places to go, a lot of diversity in where you can see different times of year. Start in early spring and start to stay high on the benches where it's a little warmer, not being down in the canyons. There's usually still water from snow melt that you can find, and we kind of live off those water holes from the snow melt. And then as the season goes on, you start to be able to get down in the canyons and get down into some of these wet areas during the day when it's hot, even swimming and staying in the shade, and then kind of retreat to either a river camp or a camp back up on the mesas. There's a lot of opportunity for all kinds of activities, hiking, fishing. Not a lot of folks come out to fly fish, but as Bill has been one who's gotten out and got to have a little fun with some of the little trout in some of these creeks. As you see in this photo, swimming through some of the narrow canyons where you have to pretty much submerge your whole self and backpack and all that. And that particular spot right there, you never know what you're going to get when you go into it. There's times where I've walked right across that, and times you've had to swim. And then getting up high and above and being able to kind of just see the landscape of where you're going is pretty amazing. And sometimes you can see your whole destination, and sometimes you look out there and you wish you could get to that next little ridge, but there's a huge canyon in your way, and without having to go 10 miles around it, there's no way through it. So it's a really fun landscape to get through. And in times like these, when there's actually water, the little swimming holes that come about just from rain, this swimming hole right here, it shows up when there's a big rain and then is usually gone within a few weeks. And so you never know what you're going to get out there. As most of when you're in the backcountry, weather has everything to do with it. And what happens in the past and what's happening while you're there can completely change your adventure. This is a shot of the Escalante River, and just to kind of show where it can vary in depth, and sometimes it's ankle deep, sometimes it's knee deep, and that's just during the normal season. And sometimes when it gets into flooding, it can be completely impassable. So it's always a little fun. That's always part of the adventure, is getting out there, and you just never really know what you're going to encounter. And again, if you're in the river corridors or if you're on the benches, water's always the thing in the desert. And sometimes there's not enough, and sometimes there's way too much. And so you get to kind of go, see what it brings you. And here's another one where, swimming in some of the canyons where it's kind of an unusual event to be out in the way back country and come across some really nice crystal clear water the right time of year to be able to swim in. And a lot of these hikes we go on are sometimes you can spend all day just getting to water, and then get to enjoy it for a little bit and turn around. Sometimes you're in the water the whole time. And the diversity of the canyons, as you saw back, the last one was in Navajo sandstone, which is pretty much just white, not a whole lot of color. And this one is in East Moody, where it's just vibrant. The reds and the purples and the blues, the colors change. And this is in the Wingate, a whole different geological time and part of the canyons. About a 50-mile difference between the last two shots of where you are.
So
And then
BJ,
there's
we're getting some pretty bad feedback, probably from the wind.
Okay.
I don't know if you can move a little bit, or if there's somewhere a little sheltered. It actually just stopped, but
It is gusting a little bit out here, so I can try to kind of protect it a little bit. Maybe, does it sound a little better if I get a little closer?
it's still, those gusts are coming through.
Okay, I'll go ahead and move inside then.
Thank you.
So as you can see, you know, some big arches, big, you know, photographer's dream to get out here and be able to spend some time. The next trip I'm doing next week is actually a group of photographers who are just out to basically spend time in the canyons. And I don't do a whole lot of guiding. I kind of just do the outfitting, cook their meals, provide the gear, whatnot. And then some of the other things you see, like is in this photo, is, you know, historic cabins. This one was built all using wood from Boulder Mountain that was floated down the river and then hiked up or packed up to this spot. And this was an old line shack for a sheep herder. And this is a pretty amazing spot. And I'll go into, you know, some of the camping spots we use. I just will say, you know, I try to use some of the best gear available. This is all Big Agnes. I use all Big Agnes tents and sleeping pads and sleeping bags. At the time, you know, Big Agnes was one of the first kind of real, somewhat local out of Colorado manufacturers of high quality camping gear. And there's been a lot of come around since, but, you know, having the right gear in this territory is completely essential. You need, again, with the weather, you never know what you're going to get: rain, sleet, snow. And to know that you're protected during that is one of the things, you know, I really try to provide for everybody, because nobody's happy with when they're wet and cold. And again, with the food, that's another thing, is you can be out in the backcountry enjoying it all, but to be fed and nurtured is an important part. And I'm sure all of you spend time in the backcountry, put a lot of time into thinking about what you're going to be eating out there, because again, if you're hungry, it's hard to really take in all the scenery and all that. So, you know, on my trips, I provide most of the gear on a lot of the trips, including all the food and kitchen gear, even down to the showers and toilet situation is all there. And so it can be, you know, and again, it's always challenging. It all depends on the weather. And what I always say is I can try to eliminate all the variables except the weather and the group dynamics. And that is kind of once you get out there, and if you can keep people fed and comfortable, the group dynamic things usually go really well. And then it's just the weather you have to wait for and just see what you get. Sometimes you get these really cold trips where you get the nights down into the low 20s. And sometimes you get the hot trips where you're out in the 80 plus degree, which doesn't seem too bad. But when you're at 6,500 feet, as you guys know, that sun's pretty intense, and bouncing off those canyon walls can get pretty hot. So during these next slides, as they go through, I'm just going to tell kind of some stories and a little bit more about the environment of the Escalante River, which, as you see, it looks really smooth and pretty gentle. And it is, in a way. I always thought, coming from Arizona, that there's less things that want to bite you in this environment. The cactus are a little smaller. You see fewer snakes, less just predators in general. But in reality, it's a really pretty rugged terrain and unforgiving in a lot of ways. And I guess to put it gently, it's not getting any easier. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a little later portion of what the future holds, but the constant droughts have really kind of put a change on things. Now, the things you will see out here, which is very diverse. You see, here's looking down into a deep slot canyon. You can't see the bottom of it. Whereas, the last photo, huge vistas with large monuments that you're looking up to. And this is kind of what's really nice, is that you can start in one place and end up in what's seemingly a different world relatively, of, even though it's the same environment, being on the river versus being on top of the mesas is a whole different world. And then going back into the mesas. And some of the wildlife you see, I've, in my years of being out there, I've seen about every animal that lives out here, including one time even a bear in the canyons, which, up in the mountains you tend to see a little bit more, but down in the canyons, really only during these kind of drought times do you really see them. Mountain lions, I've only seen a couple, but you see tracks now and again. Bobcats, coyotes, rarely, and a lot of these animals go nocturnal and with a group being loud as they tend to be and talking a lot, you rarely see them. But when you're you can either surprise them, or when just get those times where you're meandering through a landscape and come across stuff. But even, the photo of that, the collared lizard, quite a lot of lizards, quite a lot of snakes, even though on all these 20 years of being out, I've only seen 16 rattlesnakes. And the amazing thing with that is it seems like every one has been different. I know I've seen at least 8 or 10 different species of rattlesnakes out here, from the faded dwarfs, which are the most common, which are extremely shy, very little color, very small. They tend to get out of your way right away, to these hybrids of Great Basin and Hopi, and some are super aggressive. I saw one time that was only about the girth of my pinky and about 14 inches long. He had a good set of rattles, so you would say he was, a mature rattlesnake, but he was aggressive. He came after us and went up a bush to get higher and closer. So you just never know what you're going to see out here. And even though there's not a great diversity of wildlife like you would see in the Sonoran Desert, or probably around where you guys are, there's these weird hybrids because of the nature of this place being in the middle of the Great Basin, the Sonoran Desert, the mountains to the north, and there's a lot to see. This slide here, is some old steps that were carved in long ago for stock, and then have been improved on, of course. But this gives us access to these places where you would see nothing but sheer walls, and yet you see steps going up where you can take not only yourselves, but sometimes stock animals. And a lot of a lot of these stock trails have been worn down, where they used to be used for sheep and maybe for cattle sometimes, but have been abandoned for 50 some years now. And they just don't really offer much except hiking access. Again, I'm going to talk about some of the floods and drought things we're seeing over the course of the years. Now, I'll talk about one of the biggest floods I was in, which was 2008, I believe. I was in Grand Gulch, which isn't on the Escalante River, but along in the Bears Ears area. And this was back in the time kind of before really good weather forecasting, or at least extended weather forecasting. And we showed up on a Monday, and we were hiking out of the Cane Gulch Ranger Station, and they had a weather board there that said no, basically very little chance of rain the whole week, which was disconcerting because down in Grand Gulch, if anyone has been there, there's not a whole lot of water. And so we hiked down in, and we had to go pretty far to get to a spot where we knew there was some water. On Tuesday, which was the next day, 100-year flood came through, where the Grand Gulch, which was a dry wash bed where we had to search for water, was completely full, 15, 20 foot high water by 30 yards wide, 10-foot standing waves. Now the photo here is kind of one of those gentle floods. You can see this is the very beginning of a gentle flash flood. It's only coming from the slick rock above, so you kind of know there's only a certain amount that's going to come down. And even in that, you can tell just those little hills above produced water that is trickling down at that point. Now, where we were in the Grand Gulch flash flood, it's a 20-some mile long drainage that goes all the way up to 8,000 feet. And we were in the middle of the canyon, and the storms were coming from the bottom to the top. So everything that hit us was continuing upstream. So the waterfalls that we were seeing were being magnified as they went upstream and upstream and upstream and climbed up the hill and were draining down. Now, this was one of those things too. It started kind of in the morning. We had some gentle rains that would come and go in waves, and it was just the makings of a beautiful day in the canyons. But by lunchtime, the creek bed in the bottom was flowing. I'll never forget the sight of, luckily it was just a small group. It was myself, another guide, and 3 other folks. And as we went to go cross the wash, I crossed first, which was only about knee deep, but a little disorienting because any of you have been in flash floods, it's not just water coming down. There's debris and swirling mud and all that. And I went ahead and I went and crossed, put my backpack down to start helping others. And I was immediately held back, and I was stepping back as I was talking to the folks across the creek, because it was growing that fast to the point where could not get across, and I was not going to let anyone else cross. And we went ahead and I said, okay, I'll see you when it's over. Go find shelter. They went to find shelter. I went to find shelter. And by sunrise, sundown, the rain had stopped, but the canyon was flowing so big that there was full cottonwood trees flowing down the river, knocking over other cottonwood trees. Just the tremendous amount of noise I'll never forget. Everything was just blurred by the noise. It was just mind-blowing. So anyway, that one ended up fairly good. We met back in the morning. There was only ankle deep water flowing at this point, but all the benches had been scoured. Where places where it was hard to walk the day before were just cleared. There was nothing but what was rooted in the ground. There was no dead leaves, no deadfall trees. Everything had been washed out. And on this, you get to wonder how the folks back in the day, the Anasazi, could handle this kind of stuff. And it's part of the history of why they left. And I'll get into it in the future of this area. I think we could be seeing one of those drought and flood sequences again, where the drought is heavy and then they're followed by great floods. And so it's really hard to gain any ground on it because it's too dry to plant crops. And when the crops do get to survive, they're just washed away by floods. Now you still see all the remnants of the people who lived here. And they say that back, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, there was 10 times as many people living here as there are now, which meant that they were flourishing a lot better. And part of it was, they do say that the tree canopy was quite a bit denser, and they were able to, the groundwater was able to be stored, and there was more resources. Now, I did hear an interesting study that they did of the pollen core samples on one of the plateaus around here, which does confirm that there was quite a bit more going on when they first started moving here. But by the time they left in 15 to 1800 AD, they had pretty much depleted the resources, and there was no longer that nice canopy, and the droughts and the floods had really taken over to the point where it was inhospitable to wild people. So it's an interesting history that's gone on here, from just vibrant life to inhospitable to now, not too long ago, where the first the stories of the first white people who showed up in these areas said that the local Indians, the local natives, were living on wild onions and rodents. And the local Mormon sheep herders, when they kind of moved in, did their own damage. Those pollen studies that I was just talking about showed that basically within 20 years of the sheep herders' arrival, there went from about 20 native grasses to cheatgrass only on these pollen cores. They decimated the local vegetation just that quickly. And so it was pretty much impossible to live off just the land itself at that point. And the Mormons will tell, the Mormon settlers, you hear their stories of how rugged and inhospitable this place was, which is kind of what they were looking for, a place where they couldn't be gotten to by those who were following them. And they found it here, and found a pretty rugged place to live. And somehow they forged out their lifestyle, and now with all the modern conveniences, this place is once again thriving. The bringing Amazon and the internet and all that kind of stuff. I showed up before, in this area before cell phones and Amazon and internet was there, of course, and cell phones were there, but not here. And it's changed a lot. It's changed the accessibility of this place, from where you had to be completely self-reliant, and you had to know that you could go 2 to 3 weeks without being in a proper grocery store, to now with GPS and Amazon deliveries. A lot of folks have found that you can kind of live here without really batting an eye towards how rugged this place was just not all that long ago. So some of these slides I've been going through just kind of show some of the rugged beauty that's to be found out here. And you still have to work for it. It's not just that easy, but it's gotten to the point where it's nice to where, services even like mine that allow us to get out there and have a lot of the modern conveniences of just fresh food, fresh vegetables, GPSs to kind of make sure we're kind of where we want to be and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot still out there that if you really really spend time to get out there and look for it, you can find yourself in some just amazing country that still I still feel that, you know, there's a very small number of people that can really enjoy it. It's beautiful to look at, but it's not always that hospitable. So going into llamas again, since this is what I do, showing a little bit of what it takes in the off season of when we're not out enjoying the canyons. The llamas have to be sheared. I usually try to do this every other year. Sometimes I had one really bad experience with shearing a little too much, and you would think, well, getting all that wool off them has got to be good. But what I found is I have hired some professional shearing company to come out and do some llamas, thinking, God, this will take away so much of this work, because it's a lot of work trying to shear these guys. But I found that they got sunburned when you took off too much wool, and it was detrimental to a couple of the llamas. One of them has never really been the same. Another one had really bad scabbing and all that to accommodate. So shade, this is kind of back at the ranch now, having just to build some shade corridors and to get them out of the sun, keeping grass for them to eat during the off season, during the summertime, is a major part of why we have to have the land that we do and maintain it and try to water it, which is becoming increasingly difficult in these drought situations. And then building fences, of course, to keep them not only out of other people's place, but just keep them separated, having the young ones separated from the older ones, and trying to kind of maintain peace in the valley, like I say, which is not always easy. There's a lot of days where there's a lot going on with the llamas that you don't know what you're going to do. How do you deal with it? But when on the days where there's peace in the valley, it seems to kind of make it all worth it. And so this is our place now in Boulder. This is the llamas on our property. When we first started, when we first got here, since we've built, some more fences, the grass has come in quite a bit better now that we're really irrigating it. And you can see the shelters have paid off in the wintertime when they're having to be out there. And llamas handle winter better than they do summer. But of course, when, during the snowstorms and all that, you still have to make sure you're feeding them a lot. Not only just the hay, but they get some of their llama grain that has special nutrients and vitamins and all for them. So what I like to call the band shot. It's like this would be the shot on the front of the album if they were making a record. There's the whole gang kind of out there with, at the time, Echo was one of the leaders there out front. He'd be the kind of the lead singer. And it's just kind of life on the llama ranch. You think about llama packing, and there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that you don't see to kind of make it all happen, where just keeping them fed, keeping them healthy, and keeping them exercised to where when they go out on their trips, they can perform. And it's not always easy, and Bill would attest to, there's always been times where some of the llamas just don't perform. And that's just either things that have been going on with them personally, their age, their abilities, or sometimes just like anyone else, they just are not able to perform to what you'd hope they would. And so we're glad to be in this magnificent, beautiful part of the world and offer this really kind of unique service to be able to get folks out by using these animals to pack with. And it's a pretty amazing thing. And getting into the future, here's one of the new llamas, Capone, who just started this year. This was kind of a photo of him before he'd started packing. And we took him out on the 12-day trip that we did with Los Alamos Mountaineers in the spring. And he's one of these stories that it's pretty good. He had his moments, but all in all, I think the 12 days out taught him a lot. And I've used him on every trip since this spring. And he just continues to mature and do better and pack more. He's now basically what I would consider one of my he's going to pretty much go on every trip, and he's up to packing 50 to 60 pounds. These are some of the guys that are going to come up a little bit later. Napoleon is the one you see here. You can't quite tell, but he has one blue eye and one brown eye, kind of a unique trait. And I have high hopes for him. I really hope he gets to perform as well as I expect. He has a couple other young llamas coming up with him. Here's the young guns, Sig, Ruger, and Kimber, who I'll start training this summer. They probably won't be packing this fall, but by next spring, these are some of the guys that you may be seeing out there. And so I do hope again in the future to be able to see more, do more of the 12-day, the longer trips, and just be able to get out there a lot more and try to get maybe some places I've never seen yet, find some new trails, get to some of the places that maybe those who have been out here have fallen in love with and want to go back to. And be able to get to see more adventures. And kind of as we're wrapping it up, I really thank Los Alamos Mountaineers for being there with me for not only my 20 years really of being out here, but particularly some ones who encouraged me to go out and start my own business, to be able to continue this service and to be able to get folks out there. So as a cheers to you all, thank you so much for the 20 years and 10 years of service, and for letting me talk a little bit about what I do and the services I provide and what's been a major part of my life for the last portion. So on that, I thank you all very much.
All right. Thanks so much, BJ. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
We do have a couple questions in the chat, and if anyone wants to keep adding them, I will get to them as I go. And if you're good to go, BJ, we can dive into these.
Sure.
All right. So the first one is, are there benefits to using llamas versus alpacas?
Alpacas, from what I gathered, don't really pack. Alpacas are quite a bit smaller, probably half the size, maybe even more, less weight. So they don't tend to be able to pack as much, if at all. I don't know anyone who really uses alpacas for packing. There may be, but a llama, can carry 70 to upwards of 100 pounds, depending on the trails. Where I'd imagine alpacas being more like goats and stuff to carry more like 30, 40 pounds. And from what I gather, their temperament is a little bit different as far as their desire to pack. They tend to be a little more shishi, I guess. They're more for wool and for that kind of thing. So llamas definitely carry more. They're stronger. They have more of the desire to pack.
Interesting. Thank you so much. I did not know any of that. All right. So Bill wants to know where a few of the photos were taken. So there was one photo very early on showing llamas going down a narrow slot with red rock on both sides.
Yes, that is in Wolverine Canyon.
All right, take notes, Bill. Wolverine
Yeah.
Canyon for the first one. And then there's a swimming hole with 2 people in it underneath the Navajo Sandstone Tower.
Yes, that was in Death Hollow.
Death Hollow, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, you mentioned that a couple of your llamas you've had to retire. Do they live out their lives at your ranch, or what's involved in retirement?
Right. It's been very different. There's one of them, actually, Escobar, who has been around for most of my Llama2Boot career. He retired this year, and he may be going up to Washington State to live on a tulip farm where they have some goats and some alpacas. And he's always been a really friendly llama. People really love him. He's beautiful. But he's just he can't pack anymore. He's going down on his pasterns, which mean basically his kind of ankles are giving out. And so, we're going to try to give him a chance to get out to live the rest of his life doing something for other people without working. Now, again, I think depending on their service and how they performed, most of the llamas that I have now who have worked really hard for me will all stay on this property and will be buried on this property. Now that we have our own land here, it really means a lot to me now that these llamas that have worked really hard get to be retired and buried here on this property.
And there were a couple of questions actually about your property along those lines. First one was how much land do you have? I guess it's more how much land do llamas require acreage wise?
Right. Okay. It varies completely depending on how much you need to feed them supplementally. We have 7 acres of our own, and we lease another 3 acres on top of that, just above. We basically trade watering it and taking care of it for being able to graze it. Now, the last few years, we've been able to cut one of our fields and get about 50 to 60 bales average off of that, which really isn't all that much, but it's enough to kind of get a little bit of hay through the winter. The llamas during the winter time, now that we are feeding about 18 llamas, require about 2 bales of hay, 80-pound bales per day. So I usually feed 1 bale in the morning, 1 bale at night in the dead of winter. And in the summertime, on the about 7 acres of pasture we have between what we lease and what we have of our own, we're able to sustain them pretty much all winter on that pasture. So they get their break in the wintertime where they get to run around, eat whatever they want. We have a pretty nice mixture of grass, and there's 7 different kinds of grasses plus some alfalfa on the pasture, so that keeps them going. And in the winter, I try to feed them half grass, half alfalfa, so they get the protein and energy to make it through the cold nights and all that.
Thank you. All right. Where do the llamas come from?
Well, so to go way back, llamas are all from South America. They really only started being imported in the United States in the 80s. Now, a lot of mixing of breeding has been going on. Most of the llamas I have, you can kind of generally say they're like northern Argentina, northern Chile, southern Bolivia. And a lot of that has to do with their wool content. The heavier wool llamas are found a little further north. But the more desert Atacama style llamas tend to have less wool, and that's what you really want for packing. There's just less wool to get debris and all that. Plus they shed their heat a little easier with that less wool on their bellies and on their legs, which most llamas shed their heat through their belly. And so when you're packing them, as you can imagine, you have to really have that venting going on. And so less wool on their belly area is a big part of what you want in a packer. Now, for the llamas I've gotten myself, they've come from a lot of different places: Washington State, Oregon, Idaho, California, Colorado. So it really has been a matter of what's been available. And I've been really lucky of some of the llamas I've gotten. Some have had to go pretty far. And lately, all my young ones have all come from Utah, which is really surprising. But northern Utah, there was, and a lot of these aren't really formal breeders. There's people who have dabbled in breeding and then realized, well, it's just they got it in over their head, and now they have these llamas. And so I'm able to take them in, which for training, you really have to have trained llamas to train young llamas, because if you try to take them out and just start packing with them, they wonder why do I want to do this? But when they see older llamas that they've been watching going out, leaving in the trailer, coming back, there's just this kind of drama that builds up. And when they get to do it themselves, they realize, oh, this is what those big guys have been doing. This is what I want to do. This is how I fit in with the pack. And so using the older trained llamas to train the young ones has been key. So I find it's not so much where the llamas come from or their breeding, but how they're raised and how they how they want to fit in with the pack that's the most important.
So you actually almost answered the next question. It was more about training.
Okay.
What's involved in training a young llama?
Yes, and it is. It really, I don't see how it would be I just really see it would be very difficult to take a llama and try to just start training it. Now, it's in their, it is in their blood. They were able to start packing llamas up to 8,000 and 10,000 years ago in South America, because llamas are curious. They seem to be just kind of, they're curious and they want to do things, and packing just seemed to go naturally. And so you can see it, that it is in their blood, that once they start, they really take to it right away. But yes, having those trained llamas to be a role model makes everything so much easier in the training process, where they get to see the other ones get saddled. They get to see the other ones get loaded with gear. They walk out on the trails and they see the other ones get rewarded with grain and by eating these desert shrubs and getting grasses and all that kind of stuff. And it just seems to kind of go naturally that is what they're there to do. And not all of them want to, but for the most part, I've had about a 90% success rate of the llamas I bring in becoming packers.
All right, Rod wants to know, how much does a llama weigh?
I have llamas that vary from, I would say, about 300 to maybe even up to 600 pounds. One of my biggest ones, oddly enough, is named Junior, because he was only 3 when I got him, and he was the smallest of the group, so he became Junior, and now he's massive. He's a big guy. He isn't the most agile, but he's a pretty big, heavy packer. And then some of the little guys I have that maybe weigh 300 pounds, 350. And they vary too in their ability. Some of these little guys can still pack just as much as Big Junior, and some of them I have to kind of, go down on their, just because I know a lot of their longevity is how hard you use them during that time. And so I try to keep the little ones packing less and the big ones packing more. But there's a pretty big gap in even the ones I have and their weights.
All right. Do you only pack in the areas in southern Utah, or do you trailer the llamas further?
I have only ever taken the llamas once out of this area, And that was when I first started having my own llamas. I took them up with a friend into the Wiminute Wilderness in Colorado. And we did 10 days in that country. And that's when I realized how nice the trails in Colorado are, where they were wide and just nice dirt paths. And that's when I got to realize, well, oh, that's why people say they can pack these llamas at 100 pounds and go in. And I realized, yeah, if you had these nice, really well-maintained trails, they can pack heavier and go further. But where we are, where the terrain is completely inconsistent, a lot of it's not on a trail at all. That's why I kind of have to tone back their weight and all that. But yes, for the most part, I've spent all my 20 years packing in the Escalante River corridor or within not too far in this region.
Yeah, that's actually a great comparison. Interesting to hear. Okay, that was the last question I see on the chat, unless anybody wants to sneak one in there. That always happens. But if that is all the questions, BJ, I just want to say thank you so much again for sharing with us tonight. If anybody wants to join again, we have our usual astronomy talk this, you know what, we might be skipping this Friday for the holiday weekend. But do please check our website for more information on our upcoming programs. And we are discussing going back to in-person programming. So definitely watch out for changes with that. And I guess the last thing is that we'll email everybody a link to a quick survey. Even if you just answer the easy questions, those really, really help us to report to our funders and partners. So please do fill that out for us. And don't see any other questions except for a bunch of people saying thank you so much, BJ, for sharing. And I think that's it.
Great. Well, thank you for your time. And it was a real honor to be able to present this.
All right. Thank you and thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night.
Good night.